Harlem, New York. 9:47 p.m. Saturday, October 21st, 1933. The temperature had dropped to 19 degrees. Ice formed on the brownstone steps along 139th Street, turning the sidewalks into treacherous mirrors that reflected the weak yellow glow of the street lamps. The air carried the smell of coal smoke, unwashed bodies, and something else. The metallic scent that always preceded bloodshed. 3 black Packards sat parked along the curb, engines idling, exhaust clouds rising like ghosts in the frigid night air. Inside Stephanie St. Clair's Numbers headquarters, the radiators clanked against the cold. Queenie sat at her mahogany desk on the second floor, counting the day's take. $43,000. Not bad for a Saturday in the middle of the Depression. Downstairs, her runners sorted betting slips with the precision of bank clerks. This was more than gambling. It was Harlem's stock market. The economic lifeline that kept families fed when the white world offered nothing but closed doors and empty promises. Dutch Schultz had different plans for that money. The Dutchman controlled the numbers racket in the Bronx and Hell's Kitchen. With Prohibition ending, he needed new revenue streams. Harlem looked ripe for conquest, a community of desperate people run by a woman who, in his estimation, couldn't possibly understand real power. He'd already absorbed 3 smaller operations on Lenox Avenue. The operators had folded without resistance. One had tried to fight back. They found him in an alley with both hands shattered in 17 places. Tonight, Schultz had sent his best. Vincent the Razor Torino stepped out of the lead Packard, adjusting the Thompson submachine gun beneath his wool coat. Behind him, 11 more soldiers emerged into the frozen night. They moved with the casual arrogance of men who had never been told no by anyone who lived to repeat it. What they found at Queenie's door was not panic, not screaming, not the cowering woman they expected. They found Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson standing alone on the front steps. 6'1", 210 pounds, 31 years old. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than most men earned in 3 months. His hands were empty, resting casually at his sides. His face showed nothing, no anger, no fear, no emotion at all. Just the cold, calculating stare of a man who had already decided how this night would end. Torino laughed when he saw him. 1 black man against 12 armed whites. The mathematics seemed simple. "Step aside, boy," Torino called out, using a slur designed to strip away dignity. "The Dutchman owns this block now. Tell the colored madam her lease is up." Bumpy Johnson didn't move, didn't blink. When he finally spoke, his voice was conversational, the tone a judge uses when pronouncing sentence. "You're going to walk away now. You're going to tell the Dutchman that Harlem isn't for sale. You're going to remember this moment for the rest of your life, however long that turns out to be." Torino's hand moved toward his gun. In that instant, he made the mistake that would cost Dutch Schultz everything. He assumed that empty hands meant helplessness. He assumed that 1 man couldn't stop 12. He assumed that respect in Harlem could be bought with bullets and intimidation. 48 hours later, Torino would be found in the trunk of his own Packard, parked under the Manhattan Bridge. Both kneecaps shattered, fingers broken in systematic sequence. A note pinned to his blood-soaked shirt in Queenie's precise handwriting. 1 down. Door remains closed, and the man who had promised to kick in that door would learn that in Harlem in 1933, some thresholds are defended not with speeches or negotiations, but with precision, silence, and consequences that echo through the underworld for decades. The story of how Vincent Torino and the Dutchman's crew learned this lesson is a warning that history has tried to hide. If you enjoy these deep dives into the underworld, you can support the channel by buying me a coffee using the link in the description. Your support keeps these investigations alive. Now let's go back to October 19, 1933, when this war actually started. She arrived in New York from Martinique in 1912 with $17 sewn into her coat lining and an education that made her more literate than half the white men who would later try to destroy her. Stephanie Saint. Claire carried memories of plantations and overseers, the exact sound of a whip cutting through humid air, and a refusal to bow that would define everything she built. For 11 years she worked as a seamstress, watching Harlem transform from a middle-class white enclave into the capital of Black America. Learning the first law of survival, the system was designed for her humiliation, and the only way out was to build a new one. By 1923, she had recognized what the white gangsters hadn't yet understood. The numbers game wasn't just gambling. It was the economic engine that kept Harlem alive when banks refused loans and employers refused jobs, and the entire apparatus of white capitalism said no to an entire community. She started with small credit schemes and 5 runners working a 6-block radius, but she kept records with mathematical precision and paid her people fairly. When a runner collected $100 in bets, they kept 15%. When someone hit the number, they received their full payout within 2 hours. No excuses, no delays. Word spread through Harlem like electricity through copper wire. By 1933, she controlled an operation that functioned with the efficiency of a private bank and the ruthlessness of a military campaign. 57 runners moved through Harlem daily, collecting slips from 15 banking locations scattered throughout the neighborhood. Her daily take averaged $8,000 during a depression that left white millionaires jumping from Wall Street windows. Nearly $250,000 moved through her operation each month, when factory workers were lucky to make $15 a week. The money didn't disappear into mansions or diamond rings. Queenie understood that power without purpose was just noise. Her philosophy was brutal in its simplicity, repeated often and always the same: we feed our own people. The white gangsters feed on us like parasites. She funded 3 schools when the city claimed budget constraints. She paid bail for men arrested on fabricated charges by racist police officers. She employed hundreds when legitimate work was as scarce as honest politicians. Every dollar that passed through her operation served a purpose beyond profit. Ellsworth Raymond Johnson came to her attention in August 1933, 3 weeks after his release from a 6-month sentence for assault. The victim had been a white store owner who called a black woman a slur and refused to let her try on a hat. Bumpy had been shopping 2 stores down. He walked in, tried on the hat himself to prove it fit, then systematically broke the store owner's jaw in 2 places. Before Queenie trusted him, he was just another name in Harlem's Underworld, an enforcer with a quick temper and quicker fists, floating from boss to boss, loyal to no one, feared by many. But she had heard rumors about his mind, that he could see angles other men missed, that he understood real power was quiet, not loud. She tested him the way she tested everyone. She invited him to her office when the counting room held $43,000 in small bills. She offered him $5,000 in cash to tell Dutch Schultz's people where her main banking operation was located. The money sat on her desk between them. It was more than Bumpy had seen in years, an insult wrapped in an opportunity. She was calling him what most men in his position were: sellable, replaceable, cheap. Bumpy looked at the money for exactly 3 seconds. Then he looked at her with eyes that showed no greed, no calculation, just a cold assessment of what she was really asking. His response came in that low, measured voice that would later terrify men twice his size. "I don't work for money alone. I work for respect. You pay your people fairly. That's respect. You protect your community. That's respect. Money without respect is just paper that disappears when the wind blows. He left the $5,000 on her desk and walked out. She hired him the next morning. The timing was critical. Dutch Schultz, the Bronx-born gangster who had built an empire on bootleg beer and strategic brutality, was watching his revenue streams dry up as Prohibition limped toward its inevitable end. He needed new income sources, and Harlem looked ripe for conquest. A black neighborhood run by a woman. The mathematics seemed simple to a man who had never been told no by anyone who lived to repeat it. He sent his first emissary in October with an offer designed to insult. $15,000 for an operation that generated that much profit in 2 days. The messenger arrived at Queenie's office without knocking, carrying himself with the lazy confidence of someone used to walking through black neighborhoods without consequence. He dropped a briefcase full of cash on her desk and delivered his message with casual arrogance. "The Dutchman is offering you a generous retirement package, sweetheart. Take the money and stick to cooking. This is man's work now." Bumpy Johnson was standing by the window. He moved with the precision of a surgeon and the efficiency of a butcher. 3 fingers on the emissary's right hand broke before the man finished his sentence. The sound was distinct, 3 sharp cracks like kindling snapping. The scream died in the man's throat when Bumpy's other hand closed around his windpipe. The message delivered back to Schultz was written in Queenie's elegant handwriting on the man's own business card. "Come collect your boy. Next time, send a man with manners." The war had begun, and neither side understood yet what it would cost. Arthur Flegenheimer learned early that America rewarded violence more generously than virtue, and he chose his side with the calculation of an accountant and the ruthlessness of an executioner. Born in the Bronx to German Jewish immigrants, he watched his father fail at every honest attempt to earn a living, while the neighborhood thugs drove new cars and wore silk suits. The boy who renamed himself Dutch Schultz understood by age 14 what most men never grasp. Organized crime was not negotiation. It was a demolition project. And he intended to be the one holding the dynamite. His first killing came at 17. His first successful takeover at 22. By 1933, he controlled beer distribution throughout the Bronx and significant portions of Manhattan through a simple philosophy that had never failed him. Overwhelming force applied systematically breaks all resistance. His method of expansion was brutally consistent and mathematically precise. He had absorbed 17 independent operations in 3 years, using the same 3-phase playbook every time. First came the reasonable offer, always insultingly low but technically money on the table. When that was refused, his crews targeted the operation's weakest points, drivers and street-level collectors who couldn't afford bodyguards. Broken bones and hospital visits created fear. Fear created isolation. Once an operation was isolated, Schultz applied overwhelming force at the central point, usually with police conveniently responding hours too late. The formula worked because it was predictable, efficient, and backed by political corruption that functioned like an insurance policy. His assessment of Harlem was filtered through a racism so casual it functioned as business strategy rather than personal hatred. He told his lieutenants repeatedly, varying the words but never the meaning, "These coloreds don't have the organization or the backbone to fight real professionals. They're good at singing and dancing. But when real men show up with real guns, they fold like cheap suits." This wasn't just prejudice. It was tactical blindness that made contradictory evidence invisible. He saw Stephanie St. Clair not as a rival CEO, but as a squatter on property he had already decided was his. His crew reflected his confidence and shared his contempt. Vincent the Razor Torino, his chief enforcer, had killed 7 men in documented incidents, and probably twice that many in undocumented ones. He preferred cutting faces to killing, leaving permanent advertisements for Schultz's displeasure. Mickey Rosenberg handled logistics and political connections with corporate efficiency. 15 street soldiers moved beneath them, all experienced, all loyal through generous pay and witnessed consequences for disloyalty. Schultz's intelligence network was thorough because he paid well for information. Within weeks he knew Queenie's daily routines, the locations of all 15 banking operations, the names and addresses of her key personnel. Information was ammunition, and Schultz stockpiled it with military dedication. The meeting with Police Captain William Dodge happened in a basement speakeasy on October 15th. Dodge was a 20-year veteran with expensive tastes and a mortgage that exceeded his salary by a factor of 3. Schultz laid $5,000 in cash on the table, speaking in transactional language both men understood perfectly. When my boys have business in Harlem, your boys respond slowly. Radio problems, traffic delays, paperwork confusion. Dodge counted the money twice, then confirmed the weekly arrangement, $1,000 every Friday, delivered to his mistress's apartment. The machinery of corruption turned smoothly, well-oiled by decades of similar transactions. Schultz made his fatal assumption during a strategy session with his lieutenants on October 17th. When Bumpy Johnson's photograph appeared in the intelligence files, Schultz dismissed him with a wave. Johnson is just hired muscle. Remove him first, the rest will crumble like a house of cards. Without their guard dog, the woman folds immediately. He assigned Torino the specific task of eliminating Bumpy, preferably publicly, to demonstrate the cost of resistance. The escalation began immediately with coordinated precision. 3 of Queenie's runners were beaten unconscious in separate attacks. One lost vision in his left eye. Another required 18 stitches. Collection points were vandalized with systematic efficiency. Windows shattered, betting slips scattered like confetti. Threats appeared spray painted on community buildings. Schultz owns Harlem now. It was terrorism disguised as business, designed to prove that Queenie could no longer protect her people. On October 19th, Schultz convened his war council in his Bronx headquarters. His lieutenants gathered around a street map of Harlem, spread across the table. He circled Queenie's main building with a red marker, his movements deliberate and theatrical. We hit this one last. I want her to watch her empire burn before we knock on her door. What none of them knew was that Tommy Chen, standing silently by the door, had a sister who cleaned floors in Queenie's building. Tommy had been feeding information to Bumpy Johnson for weeks, not out of loyalty but because Bumpy had discovered his illegal status and offered protection instead of exposure. While Schultz circled buildings on his map, Bumpy Johnson already knew every detail of the coming assault. The Dutchman thought he was planning an invasion. He was actually walking into an ambush designed by the man he had dismissed as simple muscle. At 6 o'clock on October 19th, while Dutch Schultz sat in the Bronx drawing circles on a map, Bumpy Johnson was already 3 moves ahead, understanding what the Dutchman did not. Wars are won not by the man with the loudest threat, but by the one who moves first, fastest, and with mathematical precision. The day began with a list of 8 names, and ended with a plan to transform Harlem into fortified ground where every rooftop, every alley, every loyal man became a weapon pointed at the heart of white arrogance. His first move required converting competitors into temporary allies, a delicate operation that demanded equal parts psychology and economics. By 7:15, 8 numbers operators sat around a scarred oak table in the basement of a Lenox Avenue restaurant that never officially opened before noon. These men had spent years stealing each other's runners, undercutting each other's odds, fighting over territory with the viciousness of hungry dogs. Now they faced a shared ultimatum that made their petty rivalries irrelevant. Bumpy stood at the head of the table, hands resting flat on the wood, voice carrying the measured authority of a prosecutor reading charges. He did not plead or dramatize. He stated facts with surgical precision. 3 runners beaten unconscious. Threat spray painted on community buildings. Schultz paying white cops to look the other way while he dismantled their world piece by piece. Then came the line that transformed reluctant businessmen into reluctant soldiers. Today, it's Queenie. Tomorrow, it's you. We stand together, or we fall one by one. The silence lasted exactly 17 seconds. Then Raymond Lewis, who controlled the blocks around 125th Street, pushed $5,000 across the table, with the resignation of a man placing his final bet. What do you need? By 8:10, the alliance existed on paper and in cash. Each operator contributed a minimum of 8 men, emergency funds, and at least one safe house. The war chest totaled $38,000, and access to 43 men willing to fight. Not friendship, but mutual survival calculated in dollars and blood. The second move addressed hardware with the efficiency of a military procurement operation. By 10 o'clock, Bumpy stood in a basement warehouse behind an unmarked grocery store. Facing Sergeant Marcus Williams, a decorated World War I veteran who had returned from French trenches to discover that his uniform meant nothing to a country that still saw his skin color first. Williams had built an underground business reclaiming weapons meant for foreign wars and repurposing them for domestic survival. The transaction took 11 minutes and required no negotiation. Bumpy laid cash on a wooden crate and received 12 shotguns, 8 revolvers, and 4 Thompson submachine guns, all untraceable. All functional. Williams asked one question while wrapping the weapons in oiled cloth. Is this about ego or protection? Bumpy answered without hesitation, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. This is about making sure Harlem doesn't kneel. The weapons changed hands with the solemnity of a military transfer. The alliance had acquired teeth. Third came geography, approached with the systematic precision of an architect surveying a construction site. From noon until late afternoon, Bumpy walked rooftops and side streets, measuring angles and sight lines with mathematical accuracy. He selected 3 primary positions with clear views of Queenie's building, each offering overlapping fields of fire that would transform the street below into a controlled killing zone. He positioned his best marksmen, men who had hunted in the rural South and understood patience, distance, and the unforgiving mathematics of ballistics. Each received identical instructions delivered in the same calm tone: fire only on his signal, aim for legs and arms to disable rather than kill, create chaos but maintain tactical discipline. Every position had been chosen for specific advantages. Every man who would later stand there did so, because Bumpy had calculated that particular body and that particular location would shift the outcome by measurable degrees. The fourth move targeted the enemy from within, exploiting the fundamental weakness of all criminal organizations: loyalty purchased rather than earned. Using intelligence from Tommy Chen and other sources, Bumpy identified 3 of Schultz's soldiers with exploitable vulnerabilities. One carried gambling debts that exceeded his annual salary by $4,000. Another maintained a secret relationship that would destroy his reputation and possibly his life if exposed. The third harbored resentment over a brother beaten by Torino for a perceived disrespect. Bumpy approached each with the same calculated logic, offering solutions tailored to their specific weaknesses. Money for cooperation from the debtor. Silence about the relationship in exchange for intelligence. an address where Torino could be found alone and vulnerable, though Bumpy knew the grieving brother lacked the courage to act. The intelligence network flipped in 48 hours through pressure applied at precisely mapped psychological weak points. By Friday evening, Schultz's army carried 3 silent fractures running through its foundation. The 5th move addressed the most dangerous variable in any urban conflict: police intervention. Bumpy requested a private meeting with Lieutenant Samuel Battle, Harlem's first black police officer. A man who had endured 28 years of institutional racism while maintaining an uncompromising reputation for integrity. They met in Riverside Park at 2 o'clock. Far from witnesses and recording devices, 2 men who understood the difference between law and justice. Bumpy did not offer bribes because Battle could not be bought. Instead, he provided documented evidence of Captain Dodge's corruption, complete with photographs, dates, amounts, and witnesses to cash exchanges. The evidence was undeniable, damning, and politically explosive. The arrangement was never explicitly stated because both men understood the mathematics of mutual benefit. Bumpy would ensure that documentation reached officials who still cared about appearances. Battle would see to it that police response to any disturbance on 139th Street would be appropriately delayed by bureaucratic confusion, radio problems, and paperwork delays. Battle took the envelope without comment and walked away. The deal was understood by both men without a single illegal word being spoken. The 6th move was pure psychological warfare disguised as community service. Throughout Friday evening and Saturday, coded messages moved through Harlem's invisible communication networks with viral efficiency. Preachers mentioned it in sermons about protecting the flock. Barbers repeated it between haircuts and hot towels. Bartenders whispered it to regulars over illegal gin. The message was always identical. Saturday night, keep your children inside. Family business on 139th Street. By Saturday afternoon, the entire neighborhood understood that violence was coming and who was orchestrating their defense. Windows would be closed, doors locked, witnesses scarce when the shooting started. Throughout those 48 hours of preparation, Queenie watched Bumpy work from her second-floor office window, observing how he moved pieces across the board with the calculating precision of a chess master who could see 6 moves ahead. She had hired an enforcer and discovered a general. Every conversation he conducted, every position he established, every alliance he forged revealed a mind that understood warfare as systematic strategy rather than chaotic violence. Her respect was visible in how she deferred to his tactical decisions without question, recognizing that her money had bought her something far more valuable than muscle. It had bought her a protector who thought like a general and fought like a soldier. At 8:30 on Saturday evening, with positions established and alliances sealed, Bumpy made his final preparation. He climbed the worn stairs of a tenement building to a small apartment that smelled of liniment and boiled rice, where his grandmother lay dying slowly from tuberculosis. She was 73 years old, and still the only person in Harlem who could make him feel like the frightened child he had once been. She looked at him with eyes that had witnessed the South, the Great Migration, the police, the landlords, and now the war he was about to walk into. She saw the heavy coat that concealed the shoulder holster, the stillness in his hands that meant violence was imminent. She asked where he was going, and he gave her the only answer that respected her intelligence and their shared history. To stand in a doorway, Grandmama. She asked if he would come home. He looked at her for a long moment, memorizing her face in case this was the final time, then kissed her forehead without answering because he could not lie to the woman who had raised him. He left a sealed envelope on her kitchen table with instructions, written in his careful handwriting. If I don't return by dawn, give this to Queenie. Inside was complete intelligence on Schultz's operation, the names of every corrupt official, account numbers for hidden banks, addresses of safe houses, and tactical assessments of key personnel. The war would continue even if he fell, because real strategy survives the strategist, and Bumpy Johnson had learned long ago that victory belongs to the man who prepares for his own defeat while planning for the enemy's destruction. At 9:47 on Saturday night, October 21st, 1933, two opposing forces converged on a frozen Harlem street with radically different understandings of what was about to happen. The temperature had dropped to 19 degrees, turning exhaust from 3 idling Packards into ghostly clouds that rose through the weak yellow glow of street lamps. To Dutch Schultz's men, this looked like a simple equation: 12 armed professionals against one black man standing alone on brownstone steps. What they saw was vulnerability where there was only calculated exposure, isolation where there was strategic positioning. They were walking into an ambush, believing they were conducting an invasion. The invisible architecture of violence that Bumpy Johnson had constructed around them was meticulous and lethal. On the rooftop directly opposite Queenie's building, 2 marksmen lay prone behind a low brick wall, Winchester rifles resting on folded coats for stability, their sectors of fire mapped with surveyor precision. A second team occupied a tenement roof, 1 block down, controlling the flank with overlapping fields that would leave no escape route uncovered. The third position watched over the intersection, ready to seal off any retreat that might turn into a counterattack. In the alleys between buildings, backup crews waited with shotguns and specific orders to cut off any withdrawal that didn't follow the main avenue. Even the streetlights had been strategically altered, 2 bulbs broken earlier that evening to create shadows that favored the defenders while leaving the attackers exposed in pools of light. This was not chaos waiting to happen. It was architecture built from violence and geometry. Bumpy stood on the threshold because he understood that visible strength must always be anchored by invisible power. His mind was not racing with adrenaline, but operating with clinical detachment, processing the scene like an actuary calculating risk. He had already counted 12 men when the Packards turned the corner. He read their formation, catalogued their swagger, noted the way their hands drifted toward weapons even when they were pretending casualness. The one with the slight limp telegraphing an old injury. The one constantly shifting his weight betraying poor discipline. The quiet one hanging back who might be more dangerous than the rest. Fear had no place in his calculations because emotion was a distraction, and survival depended on mathematics and timing. Vincent Torino emerged from the lead car, adjusting the Thompson submachine gun beneath his wool coat with the exaggerated confidence of a man who had never been forced to consider his own mortality. He approached with theatrical swagger, stopping 15 feet away, close enough to be heard, but far enough to draw his weapon if needed. The racial slur came first, delivered with casual venom designed to strip away dignity and establish dominance in a single syllable. "Step aside, boy. The Dutchman owns this block now. Tell the colored madam her lease is up." Bumpy listened in absolute stillness, not interrupting, not responding to the slur with visible anger, because rage was a luxury men in his position could not afford. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the flat, measured cadence of a judge pronouncing sentence. "You're going to walk away now. You're going to tell the Dutchman that Harlem isn't for sale. You're going to remember this moment for the rest of your life, however long that turns out to be." The moment of truth arrived when Torino's pride outweighed his survival instinct. His hand moved toward the Thompson in a practiced motion that had intimidated dozens of men into submission or death, relying on the same routine that had worked in every other neighborhood that bowed when confronted with white firepower. But Bumpy Johnson had spent the previous 2 days studying Torino's patterns, learning his preferred tactics, and he moved first with explosive precision. 4 movements executed with surgical efficiency. Left hand trapped Torino's wrist before the Thompson cleared the coat, twisting it outward to break the grip. Right elbow drove into Torino's solar plexus with calculated force, collapsing the diaphragm. As Torino doubled forward, Bumpy's knee rose into his face, fracturing the nose and flooding his vision with blood. The Thompson clattered to frozen concrete. Bumpy retrieved it while simultaneously positioning Torino's body between himself and 11 soldiers now reaching for their weapons. The entire sequence took 4.5 seconds. The street exploded into coordinated violence. Schultz's men opened fire, but Bumpy had already calculated their response and positioned himself accordingly. From the rooftops, disciplined fire began immediately, not in hysterical barrages but in timed, controlled bursts, aimed at legs, shoulders, and hands. The tactical brilliance was devastating and immediate. The crossfire came from 3 elevated positions, creating overlapping fields that left Schultz's men exposed in the street, with no cover and no escape routes. They were not being slaughtered but systematically disabled. Men dropped weapons as bones shattered. Bodies spun sideways as knees buckled. Every attempt to sprint for an alley was met with precisely placed rounds that drove them back into the open. Their numerical advantage dissolved under coordinated angles and prepared positions. They were not in a street fight, but trapped in a killing ground that had been constructed around their arrogance. Bumpy kept Torino alive because dead men have limited utility while living assets bleed, fear, and can be traded. He pressed the Thompson's barrel against Torino's spine, his voice cutting through gunfire with absolute clarity. "Tell your men to drop their weapons, or I paint this street with your brains." The enforcer who had terrorized the Bronx screamed the order with genuine terror. Throughout the firefight, the community response revealed Harlem's silent solidarity. No screaming from apartment windows, no panicked civilians, just hundreds of eyes watching from behind curtains as their protector defended their territory with systematic precision. The silence was more powerful than cheering, because it demonstrated absolute faith that Bumpy Johnson would handle this threat exactly as promised. When 3 of Schultz's men were down and bleeding, Bumpy issued his final ultimatum in that same calm, measured tone that made it more terrifying than any shouted threat. "You leave now with your wounded, or you stay permanently with your dead. You have 30 seconds to decide." The mathematics were simple and brutal. Schultz's men began backing toward their cars, supporting wounded soldiers, leaving weapons scattered on the frozen street like offerings at an altar. They carried Torino between them, his blood leaving a trail on the ice, his ruined face a testament to the cost of disrespect. When the Packards finally pulled away, engines roaring in retreat, Bumpy walked calmly into the street and systematically gathered the abandoned weapons. He arranged them on Queenie's steps with deliberate precision, creating a display that would be photographed and remembered. Then he pulled a note from his pocket, written in Queenie's elegant script, and pinned it to the door with a knife. The message was mathematical and final. 12 came. 9 left. Mathematics. He lit a cigarette with steady hands and took his position again at the threshold, watching the taillights disappear into the Harlem night. He knew this had not ended the conflict, but escalated it. Dutch Schultz would not accept this level of public disgrace. The street was quiet for the moment, but the silence carried weight rather than peace. Bumpy Johnson had just announced to the entire underworld that Harlem would not go quietly into anyone's empire. The threshold had been defended, but the real war was just beginning. News of the Harlem humiliation reached Dutch Schultz at 3 a.m, delivered in the form of Vincent Torino's destroyed face and the bitter mathematics of defeat. 12 men had gone in. 9 had returned. The Dutchman listened to the account in absolute silence, his fingertips drumming against mahogany with mechanical precision, while rage built like pressure in a boiler. This wasn't just tactical failure, it was reputational catastrophe. His name had worked because fear traveled faster than facts, and now another name was spreading through the underworld with equal velocity: Bumpy Johnson. But Schultz had not built an empire by accepting defeat. He had built it by understanding that when bullets fail, there are other weapons available to men with the right connections and sufficient cash. His strategic pivot was immediate and ruthless. If street warfare couldn't break Harlem, he would use the machinery of white institutional power to crush it legally, systematically, and with the full weight of corrupt authority behind every move. Queenie and Bumpy might have won one night, but they still lived in a city whose systems had been designed to control black communities since Reconstruction. Judges, prosecutors, police captains, and the entire legal apparatus could be purchased by men who understood that law was just another commodity for sale to the highest bidder. The coordinated assault came at dawn on Tuesday, October 24th. Executed with military precision that revealed months of surveillance and preparation. 30 uniformed police officers, all carefully selected from Captain Dodge's network of flexible morality, hit 15 locations simultaneously. They didn't just arrest, they destroyed. Doors splintered under sledgehammers, safes were cracked open, and evidence appeared exactly where it needed to be. Queenie's office was ransacked with theatrical thoroughness while photographers, tipped off hours earlier, captured images for the evening papers. Marked bills materialized in desk drawers, betting slips appeared in filing cabinets that had been cleaned the previous night, and even narcotics were planted to ensure felony charges would guarantee prison time. Queenie herself was dragged out in handcuffs, her dignity stripped away by officers who treated her arrest like a performance designed to demonstrate white authority over black resistance. Bumpy Johnson watched from across the street, standing motionless in the shadows while his men begged for permission to intervene. He held them back with a single raised hand, his mind already calculating 3 moves ahead. Fighting 30 police officers would only validate their narrative and provide justification for massacre. Instead, while officers planted evidence, Bumpy's people documented everything with prosecutorial precision. Badge numbers, faces, exact timing. The names of witnesses who suddenly appeared with rehearsed testimony about crimes that never happened. He wasn't preparing a defense, he was constructing a comprehensive record of corruption that would become ammunition in a different kind of war. His counter-strategy unfolded over the next 3 weeks with systematic escalation that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of how institutional power actually functioned. His assessment was delivered to his closest associates with flat certainty. If he wants to play politics, we'll show him what real power looks like. What followed was not revenge, but the methodical dismantling of Schultz's empire, using the Dutchman's own tactics, turned against him with surgical precision. First came the revenue assault. Using intelligence gathered over months, Bumpy leaked precise locations of 6 high-earning Schultz speakeasies to federal prohibition agents who weren't on the Dutchman's payroll. The raids cost Schultz $70,000 in seized liquor and equipment within 48 hours. Second, Bumpy provided meticulously documented evidence of Schultz's tax evasion to Treasury Department investigators hungry for career-making cases. While local police could be bought, federal accountants with subpoena power were a different species of threat entirely. Third came systematic robberies of Schultz's collection men, timed strikes that reduced street-level income by 60% and turned loyalty into resentment as soldiers went unpaid. Fourth, Bumpy weaponized paranoia, spreading carefully crafted rumors that Schultz was cooperating with federal investigators, feeding them names in exchange for immunity. The lie worked because it fit the pattern of mounting federal pressure. Fifth, comprehensive evidence of Captain Dodge's corruption finally reached honest officers, neutralizing Schultz's police protection just when he needed it most. The pressure became suffocating. Federal investigations, frozen accounts, key personnel arrested or defecting. Schultz's empire wasn't collapsing dramatically, but eroding systematically. Death by 1,000 calculated cuts. Desperation replaced strategy. On November 15th, he placed a $50,000 bounty on Bumpy Johnson's head, dead or alive. 2 professional killers accepted the contract immediately, men imported from Chicago with reputations for efficiency and silence. They were found the next morning in an alley off 125th Street, both shot once in the head with clinical precision. The note pinned to their bodies was written in Bumpy's steady handwriting, the message brief and devastating. 50,000 wasn't enough. Try 100. When that message reached the Bronx, Dutch Schultz finally understood the truth he had refused to see. He wasn't fighting a street thug or simple muscle. He was fighting a general who had turned the entire city into a chessboard and was systematically removing every piece the Dutchman owned. By late November 1933, Dutch Schultz's empire was not collapsing in theatrical explosion, but eroding with the systematic inevitability of a dam developing critical structural fractures. Federal agents had frozen 3 major accounts, totaling $217,000. His street operations hemorrhaged revenue daily through coordinated robberies and strategic raids. The Dutchman had built his reputation on overwhelming force, but Bumpy Johnson had demonstrated something more dangerous, systematic intelligence applied with surgical precision that turned institutional power against itself. When the phone call came from Lucky Luciano requesting a sit-down, Schultz understood that his war with Harlem had attracted attention from men whose opinions carried consequences he could not afford to ignore. The negotiation happened in neutral territory, a warehouse in Brooklyn controlled by neither party, with Luciano serving as mediator because he recognized what Schultz had refused to see. Bumpy Johnson possessed strategic brilliance that transcended race, and wars that damaged everyone's business needed to end before the commission decided to end them permanently. Luciano laid out the terms with clinical detachment that brooked no argument. Schultz would abandon all claims to Harlem immediately and permanently. In exchange, the pressure campaign would cease, federal leaks would stop, and the systematic dismantling of his remaining operations would end. There was no negotiation because Schultz had no leverage remaining. He agreed with the bitter resignation of a man accepting amputation to save his life. Stephanie St. Clair walked out of custody on December 2nd, when all charges mysteriously evaporated like morning fog under sunlight. Evidence of prosecutorial misconduct surfaced through anonymous tips to newspapers hungry for corruption scandals. Planted evidence was exposed, paid witnesses recanted claiming coercion, and Captain Dodge suddenly faced internal investigation that would eventually end his career. Queenie returned to Harlem with her operation intact and her reputation enhanced, but victory carried weight that numbers could not capture. The cost of victory was calculated in bodies and broken families. 6 men had died defending Harlem, their names known to everyone who understood what had actually happened during those violent weeks. 12 of Schultz's soldiers were dead or permanently disabled. Hundreds of thousands in revenue had been lost on both sides. Bumpy Johnson attended every funeral for his fallen soldiers, standing in black churches while mothers wept and children asked questions that had no good answers. He ensured each family received envelopes containing more than condolences, rent money, school tuition, grocery cash, delivered with quiet respect that acknowledged men had died because they trusted him to stand at the threshold between them and the outside world. He did not apologize, because survival required no apology. He accepted responsibility like a sentence, understanding that every order given carries a cost, paid by others. The transformation was visible to everyone who watched him move through Harlem in the aftermath. Bumpy Johnson had entered this conflict as an enforcer, muscle for hire who broke bones for money. He emerged as something fundamentally different. A protector whose strategic mind had saved an entire community from absorption into white criminal empire. With respect came new expectations that would define the rest of his life. People throughout Harlem began approaching him with problems ranging from landlord disputes to police harassment to business conflicts. He had become the man everyone looked to when the system failed them, which was constantly. And that role carried expectations heavier than any weapon. In Queenie's restored office, surrounded by ledgers that documented an operation that had survived its greatest threat, they shared their final accounting. She poured expensive whiskey, a luxury afforded by survival, and asked the question that had been building since October, was it worth it? Bumpy considered the question with deliberation, weighing 6 funerals against a community that remained independent, counting broken families against hundreds who still had work and dignity. His answer came slowly, each word chosen with care. It was necessary. Whether that makes it worth it depends on what happens next. We bought time and respect. What we do with both will determine if those men died for something real or just delayed the inevitable. They understood then what they had built, not just a criminal enterprise, but a sovereign state within a city designed for their destruction. The historical impact of those 3 months established the template for Bumpy Johnson's entire career. Every future confrontation, every negotiation, every moment when he needed to project strength without firing a shot, rested on the foundation built during those frozen October nights when mathematics and strategy defeated superior firepower. He would rule Harlem for the next 30 years not merely as a gangster, but as a community institution who negotiated with the Italian mafia as an equal. The story ends where it began. Bumpy returned alone to the doorway on 139th Street, now just a brown stone entrance where children played tag on sidewalks where men had died. The neighborhood went about its business, protected by an invisible shield of respect earned through blood and systematic strategy. He stood there remembering the weight of 12 men's hatred and the sound of his own voice saying no. Then he walked away, understanding that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of that hard-won respect. Dutch Schultz never returned to Harlem and was assassinated by the Commission in 1935. Stephanie St. Clair continued her operation until 1938. Bumpy Johnson became the most feared and respected man in Harlem for 30 years. But it all started here, on this threshold, when one man decided that some doors don't open for anyone, regardless of how many guns they carry or how much money they wave. Respect, he learned, cannot be bought, stolen, or negotiated. It can only be earned through the willingness to stand alone when everyone else runs.